Hello and welcome. It is good that you are here, that you have found your way to this quiet space, this sanctuary from the noise and the hurry of the waking world. Before we begin our story tonight, take a moment. If you enjoy these journeys into the shadowed corners of the past, please do consider subscribing. It is a small gesture that helps to keep these tales alive. And if you feel so inclined, you can let me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight. It is a quiet comfort to imagine these stories drifting out across the dark like dandelion seeds on a night breeze, finding a home in so many different places. A constellation of listeners, all settling into the night, all ready to dream together. Now, let the sounds of the world around you begin to fade. Allow the weight of the day, with all its thoughts and its worries, to settle and then to dissolve, like sugar in warm water, becoming sweet and indistinct. Feel the pillow beneath your head, the gentle, reassuring pressure of the blankets. As you begin to drift, let your body grow heavy, comfortable, and still. As you close your eyes, let your mind travel. Let it drift south, down the long, slow, muddy ribbon of the Mississippi River, to a city that sleeps with one eye open, a city built on silt and secrets, on dream and decay. We are going to New Orleans, not the city of bright lights and loud music that you might know. Number. We are going deeper. We are sinking back in time, letting the years peel away like damp wallpaper in a long abandoned room. The air here is different. It is heavy. It carries the scent of sweet olive and gardenia, of chicory coffee and old damp brick, of river water and slow-moving rain, and something else, something ancient, the scent of memory itself, thick and potent as perfume. Tonight's story is not so much a story as it is a mist that has refused to burn off in the morning sun. It is a question whispered for over a century in the humid, jasmine-scented courtyards of the French Quarter. It is the story of a man, if man is the right word, who called himself Jacques Saint-Germain. But to understand him, to even begin to approach the edges of his mystery, you must first understand the city that holds his tale so tightly. Part 1. The city that death built. Let your mind paint a picture of this place, this New Orleans, as it was at the turn of the 20th century. It is a city of profound and beautiful contradictions, a place caught between the old world and the new, between water and land, between the sacred and the profane. It exists only by a sheer act of will. It is a crescent of civilization carved out of a cypress swamp, a foothold of humanity on a landscape that is constantly trying to reclaim it. The land itself is not solid ground. It is a soft, shifting delta, a sponge of silt and clay deposited over millennia by the great river. The city is sinking slowly, imperceptibly, year by year, as if the earth is trying to swallow it whole. And beneath it all, there is the water. The water is everywhere. It seeps up from below. It falls from the sky in sudden violent downpours. It rushes past in the powerful muddy current of the Mississippi. And it waits, just beyond the horizon, in the warm, treacherous expanse of the Gulf of Mexico. This constant presence of water has shaped the city's soul and most profoundly its relationship with death. In these early days, before modern drainage systems, a heavy rain could turn the streets into canals. The air is almost always damp, a tangible presence that clings to your skin, wilts your clothes, and encourages a lush, almost aggressive growth of vegetation. It also encourages decay. Wood rots, iron rusts, paint peels, and stone crumbles with a speed unseen in drier climates. The city is in a constant state of beautiful, elegant ruin. It is a reminder that nothing, not even brick and mortar, is permanent. And this relationship with impermanence is most visible in how the city treats its dead. You cannot bury your dead here. If you were to dig a grave just a few feet deep, it would fill with water before you could lower the coffin. And even if you could, the ground is so saturated that in a flood the coffins would be forced back up from the earth, their grim contents floating through the inundated streets. It was a horror the city's early inhabitants learned to avoid. So they looked to the traditions of their European homelands, to France and to Spain, and they adapted them to this strange, new environment. They built cities for their dead. Let your mind wander through one of these cemeteries, these cities of the dead like St. Louis No. 1. It is not a place of green lawns and peaceful headstones. It is a labyrinth of narrow, crowded avenues lined with rows of small houses made of stone and plaster. These are the tombs. Some are simple, oven-like wall vaults stacked one on top of the other. Others are elaborate family tombs, miniature temples with wrought iron fences and marble plaques bearing the names of generations of a single family: Leblanc, Delacroix, Devereux. They are bleached bone white by the relentless sun, stained green and black with mold and lichen from the constant humidity. The plaster cracks and peels away, revealing the soft, old brick beneath. They lean against each other at odd angles, having settled in the soft soil over the centuries. It is a city in miniature, silent and waiting. The dead are not below the ground here. They are neighbors. Their stone houses line the same streets, endure the same sun and rain. Their presence is a simple, architectural fact. The living have always shared their city with the dead in a way that is immediate and tangible. The veil between the worlds here is thin, it is porous, it is frayed at the edges. This is the city's heart, a place where history is not a distant subject but a living presence. The ghosts of French aristocrats, Spanish soldiers, pirates, enslaved Africans, yellow fever victims, and voodoo queens all walk the same streets, their stories layered one on top of the other like sediment. The air itself feels thick with unspoken narratives. The French Quarter, the Vieux Carré, is the oldest part of the city. A neat grid of streets laid out by French engineers, its design is a testament to logic and order. But life within that grid has always been anything but orderly. It is a place of deep passions, of fierce pride, of carefully hidden secrets. The architecture itself is designed for this. The houses present a stoic, often plain face to the street, their tall doors and shuttered windows offering little hint of the life within. But pass through a narrow carriageway, an allée, and you will find yourself in a different world. A hidden courtyard, a private oasis shielded from the public eye. Here, fountains trickle, banana trees rustle, and the scent of jasmine and sweet olive hangs heavy in the air. These courtyards are where the real life of the quarter unfolds, in secret, in private. It is a city built for hiding things. This was the New Orleans of 1902. A city steeped in its own mythology, a city where the line between a strange truth and a fantastic legend was always blurry. It was a city already crowded with ghosts, a place where one more mysterious, unsettling figure might almost go unnoticed. Almost. It was into this fertile ground, this city of secrets and sorrows, that the seed of our story was planted. It began not with a man, but with a house that had been sleeping for a very long time. Part 2, The Man Who Does Not Die, a meandering tale. But before we can speak of the house on Royal Street and the man who came to inhabit it, we must take a long and winding detour, for the fear and fascination that this man would later inspire did not spring from nothing. It was an old fear, an old story that he seemed to bring with him, like a faint, cold perfume from another time and another place. To understand the story that unfolded in New Orleans in the early 20th century, we must first travel back to the heart of the 18th century, to a world of powdered wigs and glittering chandeliers, to the court of the King of France. Let the image of the damp, sultry streets of the Vieux Carré dissolve from your mind. Let it be replaced by the crisp, cool air of the Ile-de-France. We are in Paris and then in Versailles, in the middle of the 1700s. The age of enlightenment is in full flower, a time of reason, of science, of philosophy. But beneath this veneer of logic and rationality, the old world of superstition, alchemy, and belief in the supernatural still holds a powerful sway. It is into this world, a world of both Voltaire and vampires, that a man arrives. He appears as if from nowhere, with no verifiable past, no known family, and no apparent source for his seemingly limitless wealth. He calls himself the Comte de Saint-Germain, the Count of Saint-Germain. His appearance is striking. He is of medium height, slender and graceful in his movements. He appears to be in his mid-40s, a man in the prime of his life. He has dark, penetrating eyes that seem to hold an ancient, weary wisdom. His features are noble, his skin smooth and unlined. He dresses with an exquisite, understated elegance, but his fingers are often adorned with rings bearing gemstones of a size and purity that make seasoned jewelers gasp. A diamond on his finger is said to be worth a king's ransom, and he treats it as a mere bauble. He is, in short, a perfect enigma, and the salons of Paris and the court of Versailles are soon buzzing with his name. His talents are bewilderingly, almost unnervingly vast. He is a musician and composer of genius. He plays the violin with a skill that rivals the greatest virtuosos of the age. He composes intricate pieces of music that are both brilliant and haunting, music that seems to contain echoes of styles both ancient and yet to be invented. He is a painter of extraordinary ability. He has developed his own pigments, and his canvases seem to glow with an inner light, his colors more vivid and lasting than any others. The jewels he paints on his portraits seem to sparkle as if they were real. He is a linguist of breathtaking scope. He speaks French, English, German, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese with the fluency and accent of a native. He is equally at home in Latin, ancient Greek, Sanskrit, and Arabic. He seems to have absorbed every language, every dialect, as if he had 1,000 years to study them. But it is his other areas of knowledge that begin to truly unsettle people. He is a chemist, or more accurately, an alchemist. He sets up a laboratory, a privilege granted to him by a captivated King Louis XV at the magnificent Château de Chambord. Here he performs experiments that defy the understanding of the era's leading scientists. He claims he can remove flaws from diamonds. He claims he can melt several small diamonds together to form one large perfect stone. He develops dyes for textiles that are brighter and more permanent than any known before. He seems to possess a knowledge of the physical world that is centuries ahead of his time. And then there is his knowledge of history. This is what truly sets him apart, what plants the first seeds of profound supernatural fear. He does not speak of history as something he has read in books. He speaks of it with the casual, intimate detail of a first-hand witness. He will recount a private conversation with King Richard the Lionheart during the Crusades. He will describe the physical appearance and mannerisms of the Queen of Sheba. He will correct a courtier on a minor detail about the court of the Valois kings centuries before with the weary air of someone who was actually there. He speaks of Pontius Pilate, of the private life of the family of Jesus Christ with a chilling offhand familiarity. He never claims to be immortal. Not in so many words, he simply lets his stories hang in the air, allowing his listeners to draw their own impossible conclusions. The court of Louis XV is utterly captivated. The king himself is enthralled, spending countless hours in private conversation with the mysterious count. The king's powerful mistress, the Marquise de Pompadour, is one of his greatest champions. She finds him brilliant, charming, and endlessly fascinating. In her memoirs, she writes of his incredible stories and of one other peculiar detail. In all the time she dined with him, she never once saw him eat or drink. He would sit at the most lavish banquet tables, surrounded by the finest food and wine in France, and simply talk, entertaining the table for hours, his own plate remaining untouched, his own glass full. This detail is noted by another famous figure of the age, the adventurer and libertine Giacomo Casanova. Casanova, a man who prided himself on his ability to see through any charlatan or trickster, meets Saint-Germain and is completely baffled. He, too, dines with the count and notes with astonishment that the man consumes nothing, subsisting, it seems, on conversation alone. Casanova, the ultimate sensualist, cannot comprehend this asceticism. He presses Saint-Germain, asking him about the strange diet. The count simply smiles his enigmatic smile and says that he has a regimen that does not permit him to eat with others. The whispers and rumors about his age begin to solidify into a concrete legend thanks to an encounter with an elderly noblewoman. The aged Countess von Georgi is presented at court. When she is introduced to the Comte de Saint-Germain, she stops, her face pale with shock. She stares at him for a long moment, then declares that this is impossible. She had met this very man, she insists, in Venice, when her late husband was ambassador there. That was in the year 1710, more than 50 years earlier. And she proclaims to the astonished court he looks exactly the same now as he did then, not a single day older. A courtier, amused, turns to the count. "Is it possible," he asked, "that you knew the countess's husband in Venice half a century ago?" Saint-Germain does not miss a beat. He turns to the old woman, a gentle, knowing look in his eyes. "Ah, yes, madame," he says, his voice soft. "I did know the Count von Georgi in Venice. I had the honor of paying you court then. You were as lovely as a spring blossom. But I have forgotten, you see. I have such a poor memory." He then proceeds to recount several small, specific, and private details of their meetings in Venice, memories that only she could possibly know. The Countess is speechless, utterly convinced. "But if this is true," she stammers, "you must be over 100 years old." The Count merely shrugs, a gesture of elegant indifference. "Madame," he says softly, "it is not impossible." This story sweeps through every salon in Europe. It is the confirmation everyone secretly suspected. He is not just a genius, he is something more. The philosopher Voltaire, a man of supreme reason and skepticism, is nonetheless fascinated. In a letter to Frederick the Great of Prussia, he famously writes of a man who knows everything and who never dies. The phrase sticks, l'homme qui ne meurt jamais, the man who never dies. For several decades, he is a fixture of European high society. He moves from court to court, France, England, Holland, Russia, the various principalities of Germany. He always arrives with a fortune, always dazzles with his knowledge and talents, and always appears to be a man of about 45. He serves as a secret diplomat for Louis XV, attempting to broker peace treaties. He establishes factories, he advises princes and kings. But as the 18th century draws to a close, as the rational revolutionary age he seemed to foresee begins to dawn, he fades from the public eye. His final years are spent in Germany as a guest of Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel, another enthusiast of alchemy and esoteric sciences, and in the year 1784 the church register in the town of Eckernförde records the death of the Comte de Saint-Germain et de Weldon. His patron Prince Charles announces that his remarkable friend is gone. But is he? A story this powerful does not accept an ending as mundane as a church record. Sightings continue for years, even decades after his supposed death. Members of French esoteric societies claim to have consulted with him. He is allegedly seen in Paris in 1789 on the eve of the French Revolution, a cataclysm he is said to have predicted to Marie Antoinette herself, warning her of the doom awaiting the monarchy. He is spotted by acquaintances in Vienna, in Italy, always looking the same, always ageless, always vanishing before he can be properly questioned. The theosophists of the late 19th century, like Madame Blavatsky, would claim he was one of the ascended masters, a secret spiritual guide for humanity. To occultists, he was the ultimate adept, a man who had discovered the elixir of life and the philosopher's stone. But for others, a darker interpretation took root. A man who lives for centuries, who never eats, who possesses unnatural charm and knowledge, who moves in the night, and who is associated with the ancient aristocracies of Europe. There was another name for such a being, a name whispered in the dark forests of Eastern Europe: vampire. The story of the Comte de Saint-Germain, the man who never dies, eventually faded from a current event into a historical curiosity, a fantastic footnote in the memoirs of a glittering bygone age. For more than a century, his name was confined to dusty books on history and the occult. Until the year 1902. In a city across the ocean, a city that was once the jewel of the French colonial empire, a city steeped in superstition and a belief in the uncanny, a city called New Orleans. And into this city walked a man with dark, penetrating eyes, with an encyclopedic knowledge of the European past, with a habit of never eating, and with a familiar, chilling name, Jacques Saint-Germain. He had come home to a city that was ready to believe in him. Part 3. The House on Royal Street Wakes. Now, let your mind travel back across the ocean, back to the turn of the 20th century. The gas lamps are just beginning to give way to the harsh new glare of electric lights, but the humid night of the French Quarter is still a place of deep shadows and flickering gold. The air, thick as velvet, carries the clatter of iron-shod wheels on cobblestone and the rhythmic, steady clopping of horses. From the river, not far away, comes the mournful low moan of a steamboat's whistle, a sound that speaks of distance and departures. On Rue Royale, Royal Street, a grand and elegant thoroughfare, there stands a handsome Creole townhouse. Its exact address has become a detail shrouded in the mists of legend. Some say 1039, others whisper 1041. It is of no consequence. What matters is the house itself. Picture it. 3 stories tall, its old bricks covered in plaster that has been painted a warm, soft ochre, a color that seems to have absorbed 100 years of afternoon sun. The paint is flaking in places, revealing the weathered textures beneath. Tall French windows on the upper floors are protected by heavy dark green shutters, most of them closed tight against the light and heat like sleeping eyelids. A deep, shaded gallery, supported by slender, fluted wooden columns, wraps around the second story. This balcony is adorned with the true signature of New Orleans architecture, a railing of exquisite, hand-wrought iron. It is not a mere fence. It is a delicate, intricate lace of black metal forged into the shapes of looping vines, flowers, and mysterious symbols. It is a testament to the skill of forgotten blacksmiths, a sign of old wealth and deep-rooted pride. For a number of years, this house has been quiet in a state of genteel neglect so common in the quarter. Its owners have died or moved away, and it has been left to the slow, patient work of time and humidity. Dust has settled on the window panes like a fine gray shroud. The hidden courtyard garden at the back, once a manicured paradise, has run wild. Tangled vines choke the life from rose bushes, and weeds sprout between the cracked flagstones. The neighbors, accustomed to its silence, no longer notice it. It is just another sleeping giant in a city full of them. Then one day in the spring of 1902, the house began to stir. The awakening was subtle at first. A carriage was seen parked before the door. Not a common cab, but a private carriage of a quality rarely seen in the city. It was lacquered in a deep, glossy black, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the peeling plaster of the buildings across the street. It was drawn by a pair of magnificent black horses, perfectly matched, their coats gleaming as if wet. They stood with an unnatural stillness, unbothered by the flies or the street noise, their heads held high. Then came the workmen. They were not the usual boisterous crew of local laborers. They were a small, quiet, and unnervingly efficient group of men who spoke in low tones. They moved with a sense of purpose that was almost reverent. They opened the great shutters, letting stale, dusty air out and the thick, humid air in. The sound of hammers and saws was muted, contained within the thick brick walls. Over the next few weeks, the house underwent a quiet and total transformation. The dust shrouds on the windows vanished, replaced by crystal-clear panes. The crumbling plaster was repaired and patched by expert hands. The entire facade was given a fresh coat of that same warm ochre paint so it glowed in the sun. The dark green shutters were mended and painted, their louvers now sharp and clean. The tangled courtyard was tamed. The weeds were pulled, the flagstones reset, and the overgrown bushes were pruned back to reveal beds that were soon filled with fragrant roses, camellias, and night-blooming jasmine. The house on Royal Street was no longer sleeping. It was meticulously restored, polished, and perfected. It was waiting for its master, and then one evening he was simply there. He did not arrive with the fanfare of a moving van or a grand procession of carriages. He materialized, it seemed, as dusk was settling its deep purple cloak over the rooftops of the quarter. A neighbor, a Creole lady sitting on her own gallery across the street, fanning herself in the evening heat, noticed a light in the second-floor window of the newly restored house. It was not the familiar, flickering, warm orange glow of a gas lamp. It was the steady, clean, white light of a modern electric bulb. And silhouetted in the frame of the window she saw a figure, a man. He stood perfectly still, looking out at the street below. He was tall and slender, dressed in an immaculate dark suit. His posture was one of supreme confidence and grace. Even from across the street she could see that he carried himself with an aristocratic stillness, a composure that seemed to belong to another, more formal age. This was the man who, in the coming days, would introduce himself to the few people he deemed it necessary to meet, his banker, his notary, a select few purveyors of fine goods. He gave his name with a charming, disarming smile and a faint, unplaceable accent that was neither French nor English nor anything the locals could identify. The name he gave was Jacques Saint-Germain. The name itself, Saint-Germain, resonated deeply in this city founded by the French. It was a fine, aristocratic name, but there was something in the way he said it, with that strange musical cadence that made it sound both impossibly ancient and perfectly new. The whispers began almost immediately. They started in the kitchens, passed from the delivery boys who brought groceries to the back gate but never saw the master of the house, to the maids who worked in the neighboring homes. From the kitchens, the whispers filtered up to the parlors and drawing rooms of Creole society, passed between ladies over cups of coffee and glasses of sherry. Who was this Monsieur Saint-Germain? The answer was simple and unsettling. No one knew. His past was a perfect, impenetrable blank. When asked, however politely, about his origins or his family, he would deflect the question with a charming smile and a vague, dismissive wave of the hand. He might mention his travels in Europe or a fondness for the Italian countryside, but he offered no specifics, no names, no timelines. He was a man without a history. He was also a man of seemingly infinite resources. He had paid for the house and its lavish, expensive renovations not with a banker's draft or a check, but in gold coin, old gold coins, some of which looked to be of European mintages, long out of circulation. He was a man of startling erudition. He spoke the formal, courtly French of the Ancien Regime, a style of speech that had not been common for over a century. He spoke flawless English with a clipped, aristocratic accent that sounded more at home in a London club than a New Orleans salon. He could converse easily in Italian, Spanish, and German. It was rumored by a scholar from Tulane University who had met him that he also had a working knowledge of ancient languages. He was a man of striking appearance. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s. His face was handsome, with high cheekbones, a strong jawline, and piercing dark eyes that seemed to see right through you. His skin was unusually pale, smooth, and unlined by either sun or worry. His dark hair was thick and swept back from a high, intelligent forehead. But it was the contrast between his youthful appearance and the ancient wisdom in his speech that was most disconcerting. He could discuss the intricacies of Napoleonic military strategy as if he had been a general on the field at Austerlitz. He could describe the social rituals of the court of Louis XIV at Versailles with the wistful intimacy of a fond memory. He could critique a new opera by comparing it to a piece by Lully or Rameau as if he had heard them on the nights of their debuts centuries before. He was by all accounts a brilliant conversationalist, a witty and engaging companion, and a man of the most refined and exquisite taste. And soon the house on Royal Street, once a forgotten relic, became the most exclusive and sought-after social destination in all of New Orleans. Part 4. The Phantom Feast. As the hot, languid summer gave way to a mild, pleasant autumn, the social season in New Orleans began in earnest, and the epicenter of that season was the house of Jacques Saint-Germain. He began to host parties, soirees, he called them. They were not the large, raucous balls favored by some of the wealthier American families. They were intimate, elegant, and impossibly exclusive gatherings. The invitations themselves were objects of art. They were delivered by a silent, uniformed footman, hand-carried on a silver tray. The cardstock was thick and creamy, imported from France, the edges gilded. The calligraphy was a perfect, flowing copperplate script, an art form that was already becoming rare. To receive one of these invitations was to be anointed, to be marked as someone of taste, importance, and interest. Those who were fortunate enough to attend would speak of the experience for weeks, their descriptions tinged with a sense of awe and disbelief. To step through the carriageway of the house on Royal Street was to step out of time. The courtyard, which had been a wild tangle just months before, was now a paradise of perfect order. A small fountain murmured in the center, its water catching the glow of lanterns, cunningly hidden amongst the foliage. The air was intoxicatingly fragrant with the scent of jasmine, gardenia, and sweet olive. The house itself was a revelation. Saint-Germain had furnished it not with the heavy, dark Victorian furniture that was then in vogue, but with antiques that were astonishing in their beauty and rarity. The drawing rooms were filled with delicate gilded chairs and settees that were clearly the work of the great Parisian ébénistes of the 18th century, furniture that belonged in a museum. The walls were hung with magnificent tapestries depicting mythological scenes, their colors still vibrant after what must have been centuries. The paintings were of a quality that stunned the city's art collectors. Portraits by artists whose names were known only to scholars, landscapes that seemed to shimmer with an internal light. The atmosphere was one of quiet, dreamlike elegance. The house was lit by electricity, a modern convenience, but the bulbs were shaded and dimmed to create a soft, flattering glow reminiscent of candlelight. And indeed, dozens of tall, pure beeswax candles also burned in silver candelabra, their flames reflected in the polished surfaces of the furniture and the crystal glasses. From somewhere in the house, a hidden chamber perhaps, the most beautiful music would drift through the rooms. A string quartet playing pieces by Haydn, Mozart, and sometimes compositions no one had ever heard before, melodies that were achingly beautiful and profoundly melancholic. And then there was the food and wine. A long mahogany table in the dining room would be laden with a feast that would have impressed a king. Great silver platters held oysters from the Gulf, glistening on beds of crushed ice. There was roasted duck with cherry sauce, intricate pastries filled with cream and fruit, delicate savory tarts, and bowls of exotic fruits that must have been shipped from far-off lands at enormous expense. The wine was the subject of the most intense speculation. It was decanted from heavy, black, unlabeled bottles, crusted with the dust and mold of a long cellarage. When poured, it was a deep, dark, ruby color. The taste, guests would later recount, was sublime, unlike anything they had ever experienced. It was rich, complex, and seemed to hold the warmth of a long-dead summer sun. Connoisseurs argued about its origin and vintage, but no one could place it. It seemed to be from a vineyard that no longer existed, from a year-long loss to history. The guests, the cream of New Orleans society, would eat this magnificent food and drink this incredible wine. They would talk and laugh and marvel at their surroundings. But mostly they would listen. Jacques Saint-Germain would glide through the rooms, a perfect, attentive host. He would stop to chat with a small group here, to refill a glass there. He never dominated the conversation, but he was always at its center. He would answer questions with wit and charm, and he would tell stories. Stories of walking through the ruins of Pompeii shortly after its excavation, of attending a concert with Bach, of a private conversation with Benjamin Franklin in Paris. He told these stories not as a historian, but as a reminiscing participant. But amidst all this splendor, this perfect performance of hospitality, there were the peculiarities, the small, strange details that guests would notice and file away, details that would be dissected in hushed tones the next day. The most significant, the most consistently noted detail was that Monsieur Saint-Germain himself never ate a single bite of the magnificent food he served. He would stand with his guests, a plate in his hand perhaps, but he would never lift a fork to his lips. He was never seen to chew, never seen to swallow. He moved among the feasting, a graceful, fasting specter. He would hold a glass of that fabulous dark red wine. He would swirl the liquid, admire its color, lift the crystal glass to his lips, as if to toast a guest. But those who watched him closely with a growing sense of unease would swear that the level of the wine in his glass never went down. He was a phantom at his own feast. And then there was his schedule. His life was lived in reverse of the sun. During the day, the house on Royal Street was as silent and shuttered as it had been in its years of neglect. No one was ever seen entering or leaving. The master of the house was presumably asleep. But as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, the house would come to life. The shutters would be thrown open, the lights would flicker on, and the preparations for the evening would begin. His parties would last late into the night, often until the first pale gray light of dawn was staining the eastern sky over the Mississippi. Then as the city began to stir with the sounds of milk carts and street sweepers, the last carriage would depart, the lights would go out, the shutters would be closed and bolted, and the house on Royal Street would fall silent once more, holding its secrets in the dark. The whispers grew louder, the speculation more fevered. The old Creole dowagers, steeped in the superstitions of their ancestors, would cross themselves when his name was mentioned. The pragmatic American businessman dismissed him as a wealthy, eccentric recluse, perhaps a charlatan with a flair for the dramatic. But then someone, a student of history perhaps, or a visitor from Europe, made the connection. They unearthed the old story, the fantastic legend from the court of Louis XV, the story of the Count of Saint-Germain, the man who lived for centuries, the man who dazzled courts with his knowledge, the man who never, ever ate. Suddenly, the peculiarities of the host on Royal Street were cast in a much older, much more sinister light. His knowledge of the past was not just scholarly, it was memory. His nocturnal habits were not just eccentric, they were unnatural. His pale skin, his strange stillness, his ageless face, it all began to fit into a pattern, a narrative that was both terrifying and thrilling. The question was no longer simply, who is he? It became, what is he? And in the dark, humid, superstitious heart of old New Orleans, an answer began to form. A word that was not spoken aloud in the polite drawing rooms, but was whispered in the kitchens, in the stables, in the shadowed alleyways of the quarter. A word that explained everything. Vampire. The city held its collective breath, caught in a web of fascination and creeping dread. The guests still flocked to his parties, drawn by the irresistible pull of his charm and his mystery, but now they watched him differently. They looked for the slip, the mistake, the confirmation of their darkest suspicions. They were moths drawn to a beautiful, cold blue flame, and they did not yet know that the story was about to reach its terrible climax. Part 5, The Lady in Blue and the Open Vein. The summer of 1903 arrived with a suffocating intensity. The heat was a physical weight, the humidity so thick it felt like breathing through a wet cloth. The days were a time of torpor, of drawn shutters and slow-moving fans. The nights offered little relief, the air remaining thick and still, charged with the energy of distant, unseen thunderstorms. But inside the house on Royal Street it was always cool, always elegant, always otherworldly. The parties continued, glittering islands of light and music in the oppressive darkness of the city. Jacques Saint-Germain was at the zenith of his social reign, a mysterious sun around which the society of New Orleans revolved. The legend needed only one more element to fully crystallize, to transform from a collection of strange rumors and historical coincidences into a full-blown tale of modern terror. The legend needed a victim, and one sweltering, airless evening in late August, it found one. The party that night was one of Saint-Germain's most splendid. The night-blooming jasmine in the courtyard had burst into a riot of fragrant white blossoms, and its heady, almost narcotic perfume drifted up and through the open French doors, mingling with the scent of wine and beeswax. The unseen orchestra was playing a waltz, a slow, melancholic tune that seemed to be composed of equal parts beauty and sorrow, a melody that made the heart ache with a nameless longing. Among the guests that evening was a young woman. Her name has been lost to the story, worn away by a century of retelling. She has become an archetype, a symbol. Let us call her the Lady in Blue, for the color of the magnificent silk dress she wore that night, a shade of deep midnight blue that mirrored the velvety twilight outside and the color of the host's favorite wine. She was not from one of the old, staid Creole families. She was a recent arrival in the city, perhaps from the north. She was vivacious, adventurous, and possessed of a modern, fearless curiosity. Like everyone else, she was utterly captivated by her host. She had heard all the whispers, all the fantastic stories of his agelessness, his strange habits, his supposed immortality. But unlike the others who held these stories at arm's length with a shiver of fear, she was drawn to them. She saw it all as a magnificent performance, a grand theatrical game, and she was determined to see behind the curtain, to discover the truth of the man behind the myth. Throughout the evening, she made it a point to remain close to Saint-Germain. She engaged him in conversation, her eyes bright with intelligence and challenge. She laughed at his witty remarks and hung on his every word as he described, with casual authority, the political intrigues of the Doge's court in 18th century Venice. She was bold, and her boldness seemed to intrigue and amuse him. He, in turn, paid her more attention than he did his other guests. His dark, penetrating eyes lingered on her, and a faint, unreadable smile played constantly on his lips. Late in the evening, as the party began to thin out, as some of the older, more cautious guests began to take their leave, the Lady in Blue saw her opportunity. She found Saint-Germain standing alone for a moment by the open French doors of the gallery, gazing out into the dark, silent street. "Monsieur," she began, her voice a little breathless from a combination of the heat and her own audacity, "your home, your parties, they are the most magnificent in all of New Orleans. But I must confess, it is you yourself who are the greatest marvel in this city of wonders." He turned to her slowly, his smile widening almost imperceptibly. "A little mystery is essential for a good life, mademoiselle. It is the salt in the soup. Do you not agree?" "I do," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "But my curiosity is a hungry beast. I have heard such fantastic stories." "I am sure you have," he said, his voice a low, smooth murmur, like the stroking of velvet. "The air in this city is thick with them. They breed in the humidity, like mosquitoes." "They say you have lived for centuries," she pressed on, leaning in a little closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They say you knew Madame de Pompadour. They say you are the man who does not die." Saint-Germain did not laugh. He did not deny it. He simply held her gaze, his own eyes deep and unreadable as wells. The silence stretched between them, thick and charged, filled only by the distant melancholic waltz and the rhythmic chirping of crickets from the courtyard below. In that moment, the charming host, the witty conversationalist, vanished completely. She saw something else in his eyes, something she was not prepared for. It was not menace. It was a coldness, an emptiness, a profound and ancient loneliness. It was the look of a being who had watched civilizations rise and crumble, a weariness so immense it was terrifying. A shiver, not of fear but of a strange, chilling awe, ran down her spine. The game had suddenly become very real. He was the first to break the silence. "You are not like the others," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "The stories do not frighten you. You wish to know if they are true." She could only nod, her throat suddenly dry. "Come with me," he said, his voice regaining some of its smooth, persuasive charm. He offered her his arm. "There is a particular wine I have not yet served tonight, a special vintage from my private cellar. I would be honored if you would share a glass with me in my study." Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. An invitation to his private study, a part of the house no guest had ever seen. This was it. This was her chance to uncover the final secret. A small, rational voice in the back of her mind screamed at her to make her excuses, to flee into the safety of the night. But a stronger, more reckless curiosity, mingled with the strange magnetism of the man before her, compelled her forward. She placed her hand on his arm. His coat felt cool to the touch despite the sweltering heat. He led her away from the dwindling party, through a heavy velvet curtain she had not noticed before, and up a narrow, winding staircase, its wooden steps worn smooth with age. They emerged into a room that was starkly different from the opulent public spaces below. This was clearly his inner sanctum, his laboratory. The walls were lined from floor to ceiling with bookshelves, crammed not with the handsome, leather-bound sets seen in other wealthy homes, but with ancient, crumbling tomes, their spines lettered in faded gold leaf with languages she did not recognize. Arabic, Hebrew, and symbols that looked like alchemical notations. The air smelled of old paper, of dust, and of something else, a dry, aromatic, faintly medicinal scent, like exotic herbs and strange chemicals. On a large, scarred mahogany desk, a collection of strange glass retorts, beakers, and what looked like an alchemist's alembic stood next to a stack of celestial star charts. The room was lit by a single bare electric bulb hanging from a wire in the ceiling. Its harsh white light cast stark, deep shadows into the corners of the room, making it feel both clinical and sinister. He did not speak. He moved with a silent grace to a heavy carved wooden cabinet in the corner. He opened it with a small brass key, revealing a small collection of those same dusty, black, unlabeled bottles from which the party's wine had been poured. He selected one and two small, exquisitely cut crystal glasses. He poured the liquid. It was a red so dark it was almost black, thick and viscous as it glugged into the glasses. He handed one to her. "To curiosity," he said, his voice once again a smooth, hypnotic murmur, "and to the courage to satisfy it." He raised his glass in a toast, but again he did not drink. He just watched her, his dark eyes seeming to burn with a cold, intense light. She lifted the glass to her lips. The aroma was intoxicating, rich and earthy, but with a strange coppery undertone she couldn't place. Her heart was pounding. This was the moment of truth. She took a small, hesitant sip. The taste was wrong. It was not wine. It was warm and salty, and it had a thick, metallic tang that coated her tongue. A wave of profound dizziness washed over her. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The shelves of books blurred into long, dark, wavering stripes. A pleasant, heavy warmth began to creep through her limbs, a profound lethargy that made her feel as if she were sinking into a deep, soft feather bed. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning horror. He was still watching her, his face a perfect, impassive mask. But his eyes were no longer cold. They were blazing with a terrible, triumphant hunger. "What?" she tried to say, but the word came out as a faint croak. Her own voice sounded very far away. He took a step closer, and then another. He moved with a speed that was not human. Before she could react, he was beside her. He reached out, his hand surprisingly, inhumanly strong, and gently, yet irresistibly, tilted her head to the side, exposing the pale, vulnerable line of her neck. "Do not be afraid," he whispered, his voice coming to her as if through a thick fog, his lips close to her ear. "It is only a small gift, a little sting, and then a revelation." Through the syrupy haze that was clouding her mind, a primal animal instinct for survival finally broke through the drug's strange spell. The game was over. The stories were all true, every last terrifying one of them. He lowered his head towards her neck. She felt his cool lips against her skin, and then a sharp, piercing pain. It was not one point of pressure, but two. Two small, sharp, exquisitely painful points, like the tips of ice-cold needles sinking deep into her flesh. The scream that tore itself from her throat was not a sound of polite society. It was a raw, guttural, animal cry of pure terror and agony. The sound was a shockwave that shattered the pleasant, dreamlike state, replacing it with a blinding, white-hot panic. A surge of pure, desperate adrenaline flooded her system, a biological imperative that momentarily overrode the strange liquid in her veins. She thrashed, she kicked, she clawed at his face with her nails. For a split second, her frantic struggle broke his grip. She didn't think, she didn't plan, she just ran. She stumbled, not back towards the winding staircase. She knew she would never make it, she knew he was too fast, but towards the only other source of light in the room, a tall set of French doors that led out onto a small private balcony overlooking the dark, empty street below. She fumbled with the latch, threw the doors open, and gasped in the thick, humid night air, her lungs burning. She heard him moving behind her, a swift, serpentine rustle of movement. She knew he would be upon her in an instant. There was no escape. Not forwards, not backwards. Only down. So she made a choice. A desperate, insane, and yet somehow logical choice. Without a second of hesitation, she scrambled onto the low, ornamental iron railing of the balcony. For one single, terrifying, heart-stopping moment, she was silhouetted against the hazy, moonless night sky, a lady in a midnight blue silk dress, perched precariously 3 stories above, the hard, unforgiving cobblestones of Royal Street. She heard another sound from behind her. A cry of pure rage and frustration from the man she had just escaped. Then she jumped. The fall was not a quick plunge. It felt to her shocked and terrified mind like a slow, dreadful descent through the heavy, soupy air. She saw the gas lamp on the corner grow larger and larger. She saw the face of a man dozing on the seat of a parked carriage turn up towards her, his mouth open in a silent O of disbelief. She felt the silk of her dress billowing around her like a broken wing. And then the world exploded into pain and went dark. Part 6. An evaporation into legend. The sound of the woman's body hitting the cobblestones was not a loud crack, but a sickening, fleshy thud, a sound of profound finality that cut through the night's ambient drone. The dozing carriage driver, jolted into shocked wakefulness, let out a strangled yell. Lights began to appear in the windows of the houses across the street. People drawn by the woman's initial scream and now the commotion below peered out from behind their shutters. Inside the house of Jacques Saint-Germain, chaos erupted. The remaining guests, hearing the high, piercing scream from above, followed by the muffled impact from the street, were thrown into a state of confusion and panic. The spell of the elegant party was irrevocably broken. The dreamlike atmosphere dissolved into a nightmare of frightened, chattering people. They streamed out of the front door, their faces pale and aghast in the flickering gaslight, their fine clothes in disarray. They gathered in a horrified semicircle around the crumpled heap of blue silk on the street, looking up in terror at the now empty balcony from which she had fallen. Within minutes, the heavy rhythmic pounding of boots on the pavement announced the arrival of 2 gendarmerie officers. They pushed their way through the morbidly curious crowd. An ambulance was summoned for the woman. She was alive miraculously. The billows of her heavy silk dress and perhaps a drunken lack of tension in her body had cushioned the fall just enough to save her life. But her leg was shattered and she was in a state of deep shock, muttering incoherently about a strange taste in her mouth, about a dreamlike room filled with old books, and about a sharp, biting pain in her neck. One of the officers, leaning in close, used his lantern to examine her. There, on the delicate skin of her throat, clearly visible against her pallor, were 2 small, red puncture wounds. They were neat, precise, and inexplicably close together, unlike any insect bite or accidental scratch he had ever seen. The senior officer, his face grim, turned his attention from the victim to the house. The front door was still standing wide open, a dark maw spilling yellow light onto the street. The last of the panicked guests were scurrying away into the night. He and his partner drew their heavy revolvers, and with a shared look of grim determination, they stepped across the threshold. The house was a scene of abrupt, panicked departure. Overturned wine glasses had bled their dark red contents onto priceless rugs. Dropped napkins lay like fallen white birds on the polished floors. A lady's delicate lace fan lay abandoned on a velvet settee. The beautiful, melancholic music had long since stopped. The house was utterly, profoundly silent. "Monsieur Saint-Germain," the officer called out, his voice loud and authoritative in the grand entryway. It was swallowed by the high ceilings, echoing back at him with no reply. They began a systematic search. They moved through the opulent downstairs rooms, the drawing room, the dining room, the salon, their lanterns cutting sharp swathes of light through the expensive gloom. Everything was in its place, save for the signs of the party's hasty conclusion. But the rooms were empty. They found the main staircase and ascended to the second floor, to the public rooms there. Empty. Then one of them noticed the heavy velvet curtain, slightly askew. Pulling it aside, they discovered the narrow, hidden staircase. Cautiously they climbed, their boots thudding on the old wood, their revolvers held ready. The staircase led them to the study. The scene that greeted them was bizarre and unsettling. The single bare electric bulb was still burning, casting its stark, unforgiving light on the towering shelves of ancient books. On the floor, a pool of dark, almost black liquid was soaking into the fibers of a fine Aubusson rug. Near the stain lay a crystal glass, shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. On the great mahogany desk, another identical glass stood, still half full of the same dark, viscous liquid. The junior officer, his curiosity overriding his caution, dipped a finger into the glass and sniffed it. It didn't smell like any wine he knew. It had a strange, faintly metallic, cloying odor that made him recoil. They searched the rest of the study. They searched the adjoining bedchamber. They searched the entire house, from the dusty, cobwebbed attic to the cool, damp wine cellar below. They swept through the perfectly manicured courtyard garden, its sweet-smelling jasmine now seeming funereal and mocking. Jacques Saint-Germain was gone. He had vanished as completely, as suddenly, and as silently as if he had been a phantom all along, a mere projection of the house's strange energies. His fine, immaculate clothes were still hanging neatly in the armoire. His strange collection of chemical and alchemical apparatus was still arranged on his desk. A locked safe, when later forced open, was found to contain thousands of dollars in gold coins. But the man himself, the master of the house, the center of the mystery, had evaporated into the thick, humid New Orleans night. The police investigation that followed was one of the strangest and most frustrating in the department's history. They had a primary witness, the injured woman whose story, though often dismissed as the hysterical ravings of a traumatized mind, remained chillingly consistent in its core details. They had the physical evidence of the 2 inexplicable puncture wounds on her neck. They had the bizarre scene in the locked study with its strange liquids and occult paraphernalia, but they had no suspect. The department's efforts to trace the man's origins were a study in futility. They checked banking records in New Orleans, New York, London, and Paris. No institution had any record of a Jacques Saint-Germain with such vast, untraceable wealth. They pored over shipping manifests and immigration records from the preceding years. Nothing. The man who had taken the city by storm for more than a year had, it seemed, no legal or financial existence whatsoever. He had simply appeared out of thin air and had just as simply dissolved back into it. Officially, the police report was left open, a case of assault with a person of interest, perpetrator unknown, having fled the scene. But unofficially, the story that spread like wildfire through the department and then through the entire city was the one that had been whispered for months, now supercharged with the violent events of that night. It was the story of the ageless Count from the courts of Europe, reborn in the New World. It was the story of the lady in blue and the 2 small red marks on her neck. It was the story of the man who called himself Jacques Saint-Germain, who threw lavish parties with phantom wine, and who, when his true nature was discovered, vanished without a trace. In the frantic, fevered retelling of the story on street corners and in saloons, the details began to blur and warp, as they always do. The truth became secondary to the power of the legend. It was the woman who had jumped from the balcony, but in some versions of the tale it was Saint Germain himself who had leaped, turning into a bat or a cloud of mist before he hit the ground. The facts mattered less than the terrifying, compelling narrative they had created. The house on Royal Street was sealed by the police. For a time it was a piece of evidence in an open and quickly cooling case. But as the years went by and no trace of Saint Germain was ever found, it was simply left closed, an official monument to an unofficial mystery. No one ever lived there again. The fine, fresh renovations began to surrender to the patient, persistent assault of the New Orleans climate. The warm ochre paint began to blister and peel once more. A fine layer of dust returned to the window panes like a patient ghost. The wild, tangled growth of the Louisiana swamp began its slow, inexorable reclamation of the courtyard garden. The house on Royal Street went back to sleep. But it was a different kind of sleep now. It was not the peaceful slumber of an empty, forgotten building. It was the haunted, restless sleep of a place with a dark, indelible, and hungry memory. Part 7. The Longest Shadow. Years bleed into decades. The world changes with a speed that would have been unimaginable in 1902. The clatter of horseshoes is replaced by the roar of the automobile. 2 world wars scar the face of the globe. Jazz, born in the very streets and back rooms of New Orleans, becomes the soundtrack of a new century. The city changes, yet in its heart the French Quarter remains stubbornly itself, a place that holds on to its ghosts with a fierce, loving tenacity. And the ghost of Jacques Saint-Germain, or whatever he was, proves to be one of the most persistent, most intriguing phantoms in this city of phantoms. The house on Royal Street still stands. It has passed through various hands over the decades. It has been at times a boarding house, an apartment building, and is now, once again, a private residence, owned by people who are, one assumes, either very brave, very skeptical, or simply drawn to the allure of its dark history. But the story clings to its bricks and its intricate ironwork like the damp, clinging moss that grows in the cracks. It has become a landmark of the city's supernatural geography. People who walk past it late at night, especially when the street is quiet and the air is still, report things. The kinds of subtle, unnerving experiences that make the hair on your arms stand up. A sudden, inexplicable flicker of light in a second-story window, even when the house is dark and its owners are known to be away. The faint, ghostly sound of a waltz, a sad, beautiful, old-world melody that seems to drift on the air for just a moment before vanishing, leaving only a profound sense of melancholy behind. The sudden, overpowering scent of night-blooming jasmine, impossibly strong even in the dead of winter when no flowers are in bloom. And then there are the sightings. The story has had more than a century to grow, to put down deep roots, and it has sprouted new, strange blossoms. People claim to have seen him. Tour guides leading ghost tours through the quarter will stop their groups across the street, and sometimes a tourist will claim to see a figure standing on that second-floor balcony, a tall, elegant man in clothes that are just slightly out of fashion, watching the street below with an expression of profound, eternal sadness. He is there for a moment, a figure of impossible stillness in the bustling, modern street, and then he is gone, fading like an afterimage on the retina. Is it just the power of suggestion, a trick of the flickering gaslight-style lamps that now illuminate the quarter for tourists? A story so powerful, so ingrained in the city's psyche that people begin to see what they expect or want to see. Perhaps, but there are other stories too, stranger, more unsettling theories that whisper that Jacques Saint-Germain never left New Orleans at all. He simply adapted. The theory suggests that to vanish so completely required a level of skill and resources that he would not simply abandon. It posits that he simply went underground, waited for the scandal to die down, and then re-emerged years later under a new name, with a new face, a new story. They say that every few decades, a new, mysterious, and independently wealthy stranger appears in the city. A man with an unplaceable accent, an encyclopedic knowledge of history and the arts, and a charm that is both captivating and deeply unsettling. In the 1940s, it was a quiet, reclusive art dealer who specialized in pre-revolutionary French furniture and artifacts, a man who seemed to know the provenance of every piece with an unnatural certainty. In the 1970s, during the oil boom, it was a mysterious European investor who bought a grand, decaying mansion in the Garden District and restored it with meticulous, historically accurate detail. In the 1990s, a visiting professor of arcane history at Tulane, a man whose lectures on medieval alchemy were legendary and who disappeared from the faculty as suddenly as he had arrived. Different names, different eras, different personas, but always the same core rumors attached to them. They keep to themselves. They seem to have no past, no family. They host small, exclusive gatherings for the city's intellectual and artistic elite. They never seem to age during the years they are known. Are they all him, shedding identities as a snake sheds its skin? Or is New Orleans simply a city that acts as a natural magnet for such characters, a haven for those who wish to live outside the normal bounds of time and society? The question remains, hanging in the humid air like an unresolved chord, a story without an end. The tale of Jacques Saint-Germain is more than just a simple ghost story. It has become a parable about New Orleans itself, a city that is beautiful and decaying, charming and dangerous, welcoming and secretive. A city that believes in the unbelievable because it has seen it time and time again. A city where the past is not dead. It is not even past. It walks the streets alongside the living. It whispers in the courtyards. It waits in the shuttered rooms of its old, tired houses. And so, as our story finally comes to a close, let the image of that handsome, haunted house on Royal Street linger in your mind's eye. Picture its tall windows, dark and watchful as the eyes of a sleeping predator. Picture the intricate black iron lace of its balcony, the place where a terrified woman once made a desperate choice between a certain death and a possible one. Think of the man who lived there, a man of impossible knowledge, of infinite charm, and of a terrible, secret thirst. A man who may have been a count, a genius, an alchemist, an immortal, or something much older, much colder, and much darker. A being who walked, it seems, straight out of the pages of European history and into the warm, waiting arms of a city that was strange enough and sad enough to understand him. Let the mystery of it all settle around you now, a soft, heavy blanket. There are no easy answers here. There is no neat conclusion where the villain is vanquished and the truth is revealed. The story simply fades away, leaving behind only the questions, the whispers, and the enduring chill of an encounter with the truly inexplicable. Perhaps as you begin to drift deeper now into the quiet, safe harbor of sleep, you can hear it, the faint, sad music of a long-ago party, the rustle of a midnight blue silk dress, the soft, rhythmic clopping of horses on a long-vanished cobblestone street. Let the sounds and the secrets of the old city guide you into your dreams. Do not be afraid of the shadows you might find there. In New Orleans, the shadows are just memories given form, and Jacques Saint-Germain is perhaps the longest shadow of them all, a shadow that has stretched across centuries, across oceans, and has come to rest here in this city of dreams, waiting patiently for the sun to set once more. Close your eyes, breathe in and out. Let the story dissolve. Let the questions go unanswered. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. The storyteller is done for the night. And the man who calls himself Saint-Germain, he is patient. He has all the time in the world. Good night.